This evening, we have the privilege of hosting a very special conversation entitled Qatar in the World. As I touched on in my opening remarks tonight, Qatar's rise on the global stage has been driven by an unwavering belief that education, culture, and dialogue are instruments of progress. Consider the scale and the intentionality of that rise. In education, Qatar has convened some of the world's most respected academic institutions and turned them outward, toward the region, toward the future. In diplomacy, Qatar has been the calm at the center of many storms, trusted where pressure is crushing and outcomes hang in delicate balance. In culture and sport, it has brought the world to Doha, from the unforgettable FIFA World Cup to the very museum that surrounds us tonight. In economics and development, it has harnessed its resources to redraw the contours of tomorrow, steered by its National Vision 2030. It was with this breadth in mind that we envisioned tonight's conversation. More than a recounting of Qatar's accomplishments, this is a call to wrestle with their meaning, regionally, globally, and for institutions like our own. How does a nation of this scale wield influence without replicating old models of power? What does cultural leadership look like in a world this fractured? And how might Georgetown, through its students, faculty, and alumni, be part of this unfolding story? These are not easy questions, which is why we have invited a speaker uniquely positioned to engage them. Her Excellency Sheikha Al Mayassa bint Hamad Al Thani, chairperson of Qatar Museums, is one of the most visionary leaders in global culture today. Under her guidance, Qatar's cultural institutions have become spaces of imagination and encounter, where local narratives engage the world, and the arts serve as agents of exchange, empathy, and influence. Through initiatives like the Years of Culture, Qatar Creates, and Qatar's permanent pavilion at the Venice Biennale, Her Excellency has redefined how a nation tells its story. Joining Her Excellency in conversation is acclaimed journalist Ayman Mohyeldin, anchor at MSNBC of the show Ayman. Ayman has been fearless in his reporting, which has commanded international attention to this region and beyond. Please join me in welcoming Her Excellency Sheikha Al Mayassa and Ayman Mohyeldin to the stage.
Thank you so much, Dean Masri. Thank you to everyone tonight for coming out and celebrating 20 years. And thank you, Your Excellency, for participating in this conversation. I'll tell you a really funny anecdote really quickly. Yesterday, we had to do a Zoom call just to speak to Her Excellency. And she was in Tokyo at 3 p.m. Qatar time yesterday. So I think I'm kind of still trying to wrap my head around the physics of how you managed to get back to Doha so quickly. But it's a testament, I think, to your tireless work ethic. And thank you tonight for being a part of it.
But to Ayman's point, initially when my office told me there's an event at the museum, they're asking you to speak, I said, I'm going to be in Osaka. I cannot be here. And then I got a text from Dean Masri. It'd be so nice of you if you could join us in this conversation. I'm like, I would love to, but do you think we can change the dates? He said, I would love to, but I have all these people flying in from DC for Georgetown's 20th anniversary, so I can't be as flexible as you wish. So I said, okay, I'm going to try to make it happen. And here we are, me and you, talking about Georgetown, about the museum.
We are very lucky to be here tonight. And, you know, the title of the conversation is Qatar in the World. And really, when you just look around the room, Your Excellency, you really see the world in Qatar tonight. And I think it speaks volumes to what Georgetown University has been able to do here. I was wondering if you could maybe just reflect on the past 20 years. I mean, we've been hearing from the students. We saw the first generation of students who are now part of Qatari society, part of the workforce, some who work for you, some who work in government. You travel around the world. I was wondering, just reflect on what these past 20 years have meant for Qatar through Georgetown University.
So I'm very privileged to be here. As I said, we're also celebrating 20 years, and my brother, Sheikh Hamad, was one of the first class first class, not one of the first class graduates of Georgetown, which happened here at the museum. And he with his team led obviously the hosting of the World Cup in Qatar. So very early on, young people graduating from Georgetown took on leadership roles and have created amazing experiences for everybody who are living in Qatar and abroad. I mean, I see people here today that I've met and known from different places, and Georgetown has brought them all here together. I mean, Abdullah was a student with me at Duke. Dr. Musa was my professor at Duke. Cannot tell them how good of a student I was. And there's just endless. I could look around the table, and for every table here, I could recognize somebody who I've met at a different life. So I think Georgetown does that. I didn't go to Georgetown. I know you were not accepted at Georgetown.
Thank you for reminding everyone that I...
Well, I wasn't telling secrets. That's what you said at the commencement speech. So, but here we are, both committed to Hoyas, and I'm very happy to be here, and I'm very happy also with the campus in Doha and Washington, of course, but specifically the Qatar campus. Dean Masri and the Dean's. I've been working with former deans as well. They've all have brought an incredible energy to the campus. I love meeting the students, whether in Doha or Washington. But also I have so many Georgetown alumni working at the museum, and I have to say they're incredibly talented. They bring a lot of energy to our departments, and I'm really looking forward to hiring more Georgetown alumni to the museums and also our cultural institutions. I mean, we have the Doha Film Institute, which Moza is a star of Ajal, so it was very nice to see you. It was a nice surprise. And we also have the Culture Diplomacy Program. We have the new Lusail Museum, where we're already working very closely with Georgetown in our new think tank. So everywhere I go, I meet Georgetown alumni, and I'm very proud. So what Qatar Foundation has done under the leadership of Her Highness and the partners that we have at Georgetown, from President DeJoya to President Groves, has been incredible. And I couldn't be more proud. I couldn't be more proud to be Qatari. And we've heard the word community over the last 24 hours. I've heard it so many times because this is what we do. We build a community of diversity of people from all nationalities. I mean, President Groves talked about the Jesuit school and the philosophy. When we opened this museum, the first exhibition we did was called Beyond Boundaries. And it was talking about the Islamic civilization at its peak, where the Islamic culture protected Muslims, Christians, and Jews, and they coexisted. So when we look at the world around us today, it looks very different to what this museum represents.
Yeah.
And I think there's an opportunity for students that are graduating from Georgetown to play a very effective role, especially in our region.
I promise that this conversation will not be political, but you did say you wanted to get in trouble, but I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that tonight. But also, I work for cable news in the U.S., so by definition, everything is always a little bit political. But given how much there's a discussion about universities right now and the importance of universities, I was wondering if you could comment about the space that has been created in Qatar for free expression. Every time I come to Qatar, and I try to come regularly, I spend time either speaking to students as I did today or members of the faculty. It's truly remarkable about the freedom that is created here and the safe space that has been created for ideas, which is in contrast to some things that we're seeing elsewhere around the world with the shrinking space around freedom of expression.
I think, it's very much rooted in our culture and our religion in the same way as the philosophy of Georgetown. We're here to serve our community, but also there's this whole notion of tolerance and respect. So people have this comfort zone to speak and say what they think. It doesn't mean I agree with you.
Right.
Many times we brought in people and artists who presented things that I don't necessarily agree with or like, but felt it was important for us to hear the other voice, because if we're going to coexist and build relationships and understand different cultures and different people, we have to be tolerant to what others have to say, even if we don't agree with them. And I think His Highness the Emir has been a testament to that, with the role that Qatar has played in mediation and trying to, foster peace and dialogue amongst all cultures, nations and conflict. It makes me have to live up to that responsibility, using arts and culture as a means to create that dialogue. But also, as you said, I mean, Georgetown has a very active program of speakers where they bring all sorts of conversations. And if you feel safe, and I think this is what Qatar allows you to feel, you know, if you're safe, if you're in an environment where you're feeling safe and no one's going to, you know, cancel your passport or ask you to leave, you're going to feel safe to speak and say what you think, even if the whole room may disagree with you, but you have that comfort.
And that's what I wanted to talk to about the art and culture in this. It is a very uniquely positioned institution, and certainly Qatar Museums and Qatar has played a very important role in cultural dialogue. When you're setting out to embark on a cultural project, whether it's the year of culture or opening a new museum, what is the North Star that you use to guide whether or not you take on a project or bring an artist here or build a new museum?
So for the years of culture, actually, this started as a legacy project for the World Cup. When we won the hosting of the World Cup in 2010, December 2nd, it was my son's birthday. I remember we all left. We went to Aspire Park to wait for the announcement and the big celebration. We decided, how do we introduce ourselves to the world, and how do we introduce the world to Qatar in preparation for the World Cup? So we established, a year of culture program where we choose the countries based on bilateral relations. So 2012 was Japan. Funny that I just came back from Japan. But Japan, you know, they broke our economy with the pearl industry by creating fake pearls. Beautiful ones, but they weren't real. And then they were the first people to sign our LNG contract. So in 2012, we were celebrating 40 years of economic relations, and we wanted to expand that because Japan is a phenomenal civilization. They have amazing interest in arts and culture, and we built this strong bond between Japanese artists, museums, and us. And then we wanted to celebrate the World Cup. Whoever was hosting the World Cup, we would celebrate. So 2014 was Brazil, 2018 was Russia, 2020 was Qatar, so we did the Arab world. And then 26 we're doing Mexico and Canada because we've already done the US.
Okay, I was going to say, just to why was the US being...
I did.
Just to make sure we're clear about that in the room.
We did the US in 2021 because we felt that as the next host, we wanted to celebrate them. And then we have, the US just has so much influence in the world of arts and culture. We already have very strong established relationships with the US museums. So we're not going to not celebrate the US in 26. We already have ongoing programs, but we wanted to focus on Mexico and Canada. This year we're doing Argentina and Chile. We have a big exhibition opening next week at the National Museum. I encourage you all to see it. It will be the first exhibition on Latin American art. And so we do it based on our projects. We have a Chilean architect building our future museum. We thought it would be great to link Chile and Argentina because they have Patagonia. And when we talk about the years of culture, we don't talk only about art and culture, as in culture. We look at culture as lifestyle. And I think this is what Qatar has been so successful in projecting, its lifestyle. The quality of life depends on the lifestyle that you can invest in. So we look at culture as a lifestyle in the sense that we include environment, we include sports, we include business, education, health. It really depends on the strength of the other country, where we exist in terms of bilateral relations, what we already have, and how we want to build on the potential relationship with the two countries. When it comes to projects, which was the second part of your question, we say, we reject more than we accept, actually, because it's not possible to do things of quality if you focus on quantity. And so, we have so many great proposals and these ideas may be amazing, but if it doesn't fit in our strategy, we just simply don't do it. Dean Safwan mentioned Venice. Qatar has announced its new pavilion in Venice in the Giardini. And that was a project that took us about 15 years to realize.
I was going to ask you about that. No, because it's the first permanent pavilion in nearly, I believe, 30 years since 1995 that a country will be building a permanent pavilion in the Giardini. So I was going to ask you about how did it get to that, and the challenges and the persistence of working towards that goal for the last 15 years.
Well, I was thinking about it this morning when I was hearing, and also with the videos of how Georgetown started in not bedroom, sorry. I'm in Japan time zone, you have to excuse me. 3 office buildings, and I was thinking, like, when I was, when I was in school here and they were talking about these, Vision 2030 and the plans, I remember my teachers, because my father would come and talk to the teachers, and then when he leaves, he's like, it's never going to happen. And I would be confused, like, how can my teacher tell me what my father is saying is not going to happen? And so when you look back, I mean, sometimes you have to dream and ignore what everybody else is saying to you, but you have to have that vision and persistence. And I think that was what we did in education, in health and sports. So many things Qatar was able to do, not because it has resources or money, which is what the easy shortcut that people try to position us in. It was because there was a vision and there was a plan and there was persistence and consistency. And this is a general, I think, direction that we took. And in the same way, when it came to Venice, I don't know how much I can say, but we knew what we wanted, and we just, we were just persistent. And I'm very happy that finally we're going to be able to announce the details of the design at the Architectural Biennale on May 8th. For anyone who happens to be in Venice, you're all welcome to join. It's open to the public. And and I think it was just a clear idea of where we want to be and how we want to do it, and not accepting anything else.
The architect that has been awarded this pavilion is a Lebanese architect based in France. How important was it when we think about architects and the stories they tell? Was it important for you that the architect be somebody from the region, knows the story of the region, speaks the region?
So that's a good question. We had 9 architects, all from the region. We made that a criteria from the beginning, and it wasn't...
Why was that a criteria, if you don't mind me following up?
Because we felt that that's what Qatar was doing. Qatar was giving Arabs a voice, whether in film, whether in education, quality education, whether in Al Jazeera media, where you used to be. We felt that was just a commitment that we had, that we wanted to take Arab talent globally. And so I mean, a lot of the greatest architects are friends because they have projects here, and it could have been a very easy choice to choose a Pritzker Prize architect or somebody who's built 101 buildings. And we felt that that was not the approach we wanted to take. So we had 9 different architects, and we had an international jury chaired by Ram Koolhaas. And we chose Lina, not because she was a woman, but then it just happened that she's the only woman now to have a pavilion in the Giardini. Every other pavilion is built by a male architect. And it was a difficult decision because we had very good ideas.
Can I, just to come back to the issue of politics and art, have you ever in your experience seen that the geopolitics affects your ability to do the cultural and artistic projects that you want? You talked about bilateral relationships between the countries that you partner with, but have you ever come against any resistance sometimes from the geopolitics?
I wouldn't say resistance. I could say misunderstanding, but I'm very good at clearing any misunderstanding. So we've had situations where people, might have taken a different position that we had anticipated or agreed on because of geopolitics. But I think the reputation we have built culturally and the tolerance in general as a country has allowed us to fix things quite quickly with no consequences, really. I've never felt I couldn't do something or be somewhere or work with an artist or take something we've done here globally.
I was just moved by a story that you were telling about the architect of this amazing museum, Ayman Mohyeldin, and I was thinking about how architects are storytellers in their own right. And when you look around all of the amazing museums that have been built in Qatar, each one tells a unique story just by virtue of the architects that have been involved in these projects. That story of Ayman Mohyeldin wanting to discover the Muslim world and coming out of retirement I think speaks volumes to the kind of openings Qatar and, the museums here have offered the world to see. How difficult was it to convince him to come out of retirement to come and do this project?
So I just recorded a podcast on that, so as you can hear all about it with Louis Morial, who's who works for the Aga Khan, and IMP had just built the pyramid, the glass pyramid at the Louvre, and this museum actually started a competition. And I think there were 11 architects, if I'm not mistaken. Zaha Hadid was one of them, because we became good friends, and she was so upset she didn't get this project. But after they presented and they chose an architect, when they looked at and he wasn't a very known architect. And at that time, my father's vision for the cultural sector was to set the benchmark high. He wanted everybody to be proud of his history, his civilization, his culture, and he wanted to make sure that Islam was understood through arts and culture because of all the creativity that was created over the centuries, where the Muslim Empire, created science, maths, history, geography, maps, whatever, astronomy, astrology. So when they looked at the price of the finalists, the budget, my father turned around to Louis Morial, who was advising at that time. He said, "What would it cost if I brought IMP? If I'm going to pay this much for this architect and we're going to do this investment, why don't we get the best here?" And IMP had been retired at that time. And so they said, well, we can organize a meeting for you in New York where he lives and you can have a conversation. And I think after a few conversations, IMP agreed to come out of retirement with the condition that he could travel the Muslim world, because it was a world he didn't know about, and he wanted to learn about this part of the world so that his architecture gets inspired from it. And that's how it began. And I was very lucky. I wasn't involved in the beginning. I was still a student, but I was lucky to get, to the tail end of this project, where the building was built, but the collection was not complete. The park was not established. We had to rethink the whole park. And I worked with Pei and Richard Serra on the Sculpture 7, which is actually, I don't know if many of you know, is inspired by an Afghan minaret from the 1st century. And Richard, did his homework. He studied all the different minarets of our region, and he was very much inspired by the one from Afghanistan, which actually this fall we're going to do an exhibition on Afghani architecture here at the Islamic Art Museum. So, yeah, IMP was a great architect who my father wanted to bring, and my father is a very convincing man. He was able to convince him to build this museum, and I think he has no regrets, because I was also telling you, at his 100th birthday, his birthday cake was of this museum.
Yeah, that's part of this. That's why I wanted to bring it up, because it was actually very moving and kind of a full circle moment. When you think of the museums that you have built, maybe this is a difficult question. Let's just keep it architecturally. Is there one that is your favorite? You've had some of the best architects in the world, Jean Nouvel,
So I have to say, we are building 4 new museums at the moment, and all are very different, because they need to be different, because part of the architecture is to tell the story of what's inside, and we work very hard on the museography of the museum. I would say every museum to me is special because I learned something. This was the first museum I worked in, and some people who love this museum don't necessarily like the Jean Nouvel Museum, and vice versa. Mm. But I would say the Jean Nouvel was like the birthing of a museum for me, because it was, starting from scratch and going through the whole process, resisting criticism because we were so late. It took us 10 years to build that museum. We built the building, and it took us maybe 2 years to figure out how to show art inside the slanted walls of the museum. And I remember we took a decision. I vetoed that decision, actually, because everybody was against my idea, to allow people to visit the museum while nothing is there, because the architecture was so powerful. And if we had left it to Jean Nouvel, he would have only wanted to project videos. He told me, "You do not have a Mona Lisa." I said, "Jean, I do not need a Mona Lisa to open my museum. It's the National Museum of Qatar." And we had so many debates. In the end, I said, "Listen, you're the architect. Let us do the museography." And so what happened was, for 2 years, because we were trying to figure it all out, we allowed people to visit the museum through architecture tours. Some were done with Jean Nouvel, others with curators or architectural critics. And I remember so many people who had gone through this museum before anything was installed came to me at the opening and said, "We feel like we're home." Because if you build your home, you have to experience the whole thing. Often, visitors do not experience the museum just as an architectural building. They experience the full package. And I think sometimes, depending on the architecture of the building, of course, you lose something significant in that.
And how have these museums changed the rise of Qatari artists, the rise of Qatari architects? How has it fostered within Qatar a new generation of creatives, and potentially maybe we'll see one day a museum built by a Qatari architect?
I think that will happen very soon. I'm not doubtful about that, but I think we have 4 museums in operation.
Right.
3 of my museum directors are Qatari. I'm not to say we only look for Qatari, just, they went through the system, they progressed over time. Many artists, if you follow them on Instagram, will say that they were inspired by sitting here at the cafe of the Museum of Islamic Art. They got ideas. All the films that we did at the National Museum were by international film directors. But many of the filmmakers from Doha Film Institute, who were young at that time, were interning with these film directors. And many of them today are established filmmakers showing their films on international film circuits. So our strategy falls under the Qatar National Vision 2030, of which human capacity, or building human capacity, was our number one purpose. When we built the museums, until today, I always remind my team, it was never done for tourism. It was always done for human development. Because my father would always tell us the number one commodity we have is our people. We have to invest. That's why education, sports, health, and culture was another component. If you do something well, there will be a domino effect. I remember when we opened this museum, I was upstairs in my office, and my staff were so excited because Christian Louboutin was at the museum with Diane von Furstenberg. So I went down to say hello. I said, what brings you here? They're like, "We were in Oman sailing. We read about the museum on the New York Times, so we came over." Because of the review, this was labeled as a new national wonder when we opened. So I think if you do things well, which is what we try to do, it's always quality over quantity, then the results speak for themselves. And then you build we have a very strong local community of museum goers today, but also a very strong international community. Every year we have new openings, and most of the time the people who come will come again. And many times people will say, "Oh, I met somebody who lives in New York, and I live in New York, but I met them in Doha." Yeah. And so many people come back because they meet people in a very intimate setting, very different to what they're used to, and they become very good friends. I know you experience that with many people who've come here for the Qatar Creates. Yeah. And so I think that's really part of our culture and hospitality. I don't think you can fake that. You cannot fake making people feel welcome, and you cannot fake respecting people's view. And I think that's really part of our DNA.
Yeah, and because I've had the chance to speak to you over so many years in so many different settings, I know how important a creative economy is to you. And I wonder where on the benchmark of where you want to see Qatar as a creative economy, where is it right now if you can chart it? The growth that you have seen in the creative spaces, the growth that you have seen, or do you feel like there's still a lot more work that needs to be done? Where is it strong? Where can it continue to grow?
So the creative economy is our next focus in the next 10 years. The decade-long focus for us is the creative economy, because we've seen the results, but they happened organically. We've seen SMEs, we've seen young companies, we've seen brands launch from here and they go globally. They're online, they're on Farfetch, they're on Matches. Matches has gone bankrupt, but not a good example. But no, so we've realized, and UN reports, if you read the UN reports, 10% of world GDP will come from the creative economy. So we're very much invested in that and craftsmanship, because I think with AI, these are two areas that people always find jobs in the creative economy and craftsmanship. When you go to Italy, let's say, and you go to a leather making company and you feel like you see the person made it with their hands, it's more desirable than if you go to a shopping mall and find something and you don't know what the original is. So we're going back to that local culture and craftsmanship, and that's very much rooted in our museum strategies. We're building 4 new museums, and they're all taking that approach in terms of craftsmanship and creative economy. And I think we're already seeing it. It's almost, we're over capacity. Like we have so much talent that we're trying to pull them into different industries, if you like, because every industry will depend on the creative economy.
It was the theme of the Osaka Pavilion there, design or innovation through tradition. And I thought it was a very kind of poignant point to link it back here to Qatar, because there's so much pressure in the world right now to modernize and lose the traditions and lose the skill set that certainly people in this part of the world have held on to for generations. Do you ever feel that pressure from the outside world to change this part of Qatar's design and creative process?
Not at all, because I think for us, heritage and that balance of developing but not getting too modern has always been part of our vision. Like if you think about the World Cup, the most iconic image of Messi was when His Highness dressed him with the bint, and that went viral globally. When he talked about the Osaka Pavilion, we worked with Kengo Kuma, who is a Japanese architect, but he came here and he studied the traditional making of dhows, of the wood, and how it was used, and that was replicated in the pavilion. And it was all about, I mean, the theme of most of the pavilions there was about water, climate, sustainability. And we showed how going back to local tradition and understanding how people lived. And we heard it today. We heard it at the board meeting. 2 students were talking about it because they're in a science class at Georgetown. And they were talking about how through the class at Georgetown, they were learning about their family farm and the traditions and cultures that you can easily disconnect from. So through our exhibitions, we curate things to make people stop, think, reflect, and understand that our heritage, our culture, is as important as anybody else's. You don't become more modern or cooler by taking something from abroad and making it your own. You can respect it, you can understand it, you can like it, you can choose to dress in it or engage in it, but your own culture and heritage is as important. And that's like very much embedded in all of our programs.
I have time for perhaps one last question, but I was thinking as we reflect on the past 20 years of Georgetown University and the relationship with Qatar, not to put you on the spot or look into a crystal ball, but what would you like to see happen in the next 20 years? What do you anticipate, or what are you preparing for the next 20 years in the position that you occupy here in Qatar?
That's actually a very good question, because we've worked with our government under the guidance and leadership of His Highness on something called the Qatar Blueprint, which basically looks at Vision 2050. What happens after 2030? We have Vision 2030. We're in 2025. What are we projecting? Like, what are we going to do in the next 20 years after that completion of the vision? And we're working with completing the NDS 3 policies through all the departments. And really, everything we've done has been organic. It's understanding what we have, where we want to be, and creating that gap analysis to build the platform and the road to getting there. I mean, the beautiful community that we have here allows for a lot of creativity. And this planning engages all sectors, private sector, public sector, semi-government, community members, just to really understand what people, if you're 20 years old now, what would you like to see when you're 40? Right. What kind of quality life would you like your family to have? And, everywhere I go, people talk about Qatar in such a positive way. The respect and admiration that they have for the leadership, for the way that Qatar conducted itself vis-a-vis, conflicts in our region and beyond, but also the commitment we have towards human development, looking at all the sectors we already discussed: culture, sports, education, health. It's a whole ecosystem. It's not looking at one sector or somebody has done this, let's do the same, let's do bigger, let's do taller. That's not part of what we like to do. We're very focused, very long-term, strategic nation, and things will happen organically. And I think, it's the next 20 years we require a lot of work to keep up with everything else that's happening, and social media doesn't allow for many mistakes. And so let's see.
Let's see, indeed. Your Excellency, thank you so much. I really appreciated this very candid conversation. I know that you're jet lagged, so
are you.
So I didn't have to do much talking. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you
It's
so
a
much.
pleasure. Thank you.